I had this ready last night, and James is complaining on the workshop that he has too many clicks for him, too many clicks. So I said, okay, well then I can fix that easily. So I have 3 flavors of the same Tiddler, basically 3 flavors that you can read it. And this is interesting too, because at different times you want it in different formats. So maybe we should, as designers, figure out ways to make it accessible to people who have different needs. Like the first time you read this, you might want it in a certain way. The next time you come back to it, you might be looking for a specific fact. So, so we're going to do the linear text, right? So this just puts all that stuff in one Tiddler, exposes it all. I don't like that. You might have guessed that. I like this one. Peers and tabs for each primary section. So you can close it. This is the one that James is complaining about. So basically the concept is this. You know, we focused on 5 hypertextual practices, and you're familiar with them. I use these tabs to just let you flip through them. And I think, Meg, you played with tabs in one of your essays, and I think it's kind of an interesting way to present information. That my goal here, I don't know if you think we're accomplishing it as a designer, is to suggest that all 5 of those are roughly equal, that they're not hierarchical in any way, that one doesn't take precedence over another. So you know those 5 practices pretty well. We've been beating those to death. We developed a set of 6 techniques, and I took a stab at representing those 6 techniques using the commenting feature. And so they're supposed, because these are things that you write in TiddlyWiki, they're supposed to connect somehow to the actual kind of code that you write. So, so you know how to make links with double square brackets, and you know how to create lists, you know how to tag things, and you've been creating templates, and you've been transcluding, and you've been importing. So those are the 6 techniques. They don't line up perfectly with the 5 practices, but pretty closely. The last one, importing tiddlers, isn't really a practice. It's just a fact of life. So you use those practices and use techniques, and now you have to create and implement some self-design exercises that engage those practices and use those techniques. So that's pretty straightforward. And so to create a self-design exercise, the general idea is that you make things that you're kind of interested in constructing. Not shapes, not random wiki tables, not stories about your dogs, but things that you actually might be interested. Stuff that you've done in other classes is absolutely good. Stuff you're doing at work would be perfectly fine. Stuff you're doing for a class now, stuff you're thinking about doing for a master's thesis or a final project, something that's related to your life or something that you'd like to play with. So absolutely anything is acceptable. You can weakify existing texts. Some people find that really a useful exercise to do. You don't have to worry about the text itself. So your whole work is in the structure. Other people want to write something, and they want to write it originally, and they want to create it with structure behind it. Either way, you can generate a big set of tiddlers, small set, big set, in a table like we did with Wikipedia tables, but you can use a spreadsheet for any set of tiddlers. And of course, you can do anything else you want. That's strange that link is broken, but I'll show you where those ideas, I think it works over here. So I said before, the 4 exercises can be independent or built sequentially, however you want to do it. Basic process for creating an exercise is you, like everything else, you start with a tiddler. And I probably should have done this from the very beginning, but next time I will. A specific tiddler can be a tiddler in a wiki, it can be a new wiki, but it's still a tiddler, becomes the home base for your project. So instead of sharing a link to a wiki, you're sharing a link to a tiddler, a permaview. And if you don't know how to do, I'll show you how to do those. Those are straightforward, but it's a link to a specific tiddler. I would ask that you create this new tiddler, this new link, as a single word, or use camel case, because that'll make your permaview very pretty and easy to read. So you want to have the %20s for spaces, and they work across browsers, etc. From that one tiddler, create a set of tiddlers that address a set of topics about your project. This is my new approach to using hide and show. You can look in the code to see how I'm doing that. I think I picked it up from one of you who figured out that you don't. Anyway, you can play with and look at the code to see how we're getting that to work. So there's basically 4 topics in your exercise that you want to create. So you want to describe the project, start with a single sentence, write a paragraph. It's that sentence that goes in the Google group. You want to design it or talk about how the reader is going to interact with it. If you're writing something for your own purposes and so that you don't imagine that it has an audience, then you become the reader. So you describe how you interact with it. And there's absolutely, that's a perfectly logical thing. If you're writing a calendar for yourself, you know, a to-do list for yourself, you don't have to anticipate other readers, but you have to anticipate how you're going to react with it. So you become the reader. Talk about what your objectives are as the reader or what your reader's objectives are. Think about the device, tablet, laptop, phone, all 3. And talk about whether your readers, even if that's you, will be writing. So like if you're using a to-do list and you have to check something off as done, that means you're writing. In other words, you're pushing information into it. If you're generating from a text, from an existing text, talk about where you're going to get your source material, and talk about it in response to the previous exercises. This is a continuation of 5.1. This is a whole new project. This is the 3rd iteration of the same project, just so that we have an idea of that. If you're writing the same, you go through the same process for every exercise, even if it's a continuation. And so create tiddlers, make them tags so that they're easy to find. Your primary tiddler can have some way of listing those or tabs or however you want to do it. And then you post a new thread, to Google Group with those components, 5 of them. They're very similar to the topics of the project. In fact, they line up very, very closely. So it says a basic statement, a design statement, some examples, relationship, and an entry point, a permalink to the entry point. That's the only thing that's not in that. So you write those, you submit it to the Google group, and then you've got your exercise. So I'd like that first concept to be in the group by Wednesday, and then you can submit your project by Sunday, and then basically every successive Sunday you have something that you'll submit into either to the group or your project will be done. So it kind of walks you through the semester and it regularizes it. And then in class, what we'll do is work on your projects. We'll step through and we'll use the Google group as a way to direct us to things that we'll look at and critique during the classes. And then, so there's a bunch of ideas. And I just wanted to step through them, and we can add things to these ideas. There's no limit to how many you can have, and we'll go from there. So I'm in these 3s. So I made 3 ways to view the project ideas. The first one we haven't really seen for a while, but the first idea of how to view project ideas is put each one in a tiddler and open them all up, and let's look at them as its own text. So it's like a text within a text. And I'll show you how that works. You can just get a set of vertical tabs. Some people like that. You can click on that and then each one of them. And that's a fairly efficient way to view content. You can get a list of them all and scroll, or you can open them all into a separate tiddler, which we'll do here. Closes all the rest of the tiddlers. Whatever you had open is gone. So it completely resets the wiki. And you can look at the code to see how we're doing that. Okay. So let me step through. I think there's like 10 of them, and some of them you've heard before. Some of them are new. A lot of them pick up some ideas that I've had in previous classes and stuff. And I'll just step through them and talk about how each one of them is different and requires different kinds of skills in terms of designing and writing an interactive text. And you can follow any of these links. So I don't want to say I'm a fan of 9/11, but I've been interested in the September 11th terrorist attacks for almost 20 years now. I still think they're interesting to talk about. This chapter in the official report called "We Have Some Planes" is absolutely chilling in its detail. It's like a minute by minute. If you remember that report, there were 4 airplanes. That event, I suspect most of you do, right? 4 airplanes that were hijacked, 3 that flew into buildings, 1 that crashed. This is a minute by minute report of what happened on those planes, starting with the 2019 hijackers. And so you've got 19 hijackers, 4 planes, 3 cities. Hopefully you're saying, oh, I see where it's going to be a wiki, right? You can navigate it by hijacker, you can navigate it by time, you can navigate it by city. There's lots of factoids that you can pull in. So you could take this text and break it into a wiki. Someone's done that before. If you search long enough and hard enough, you'll probably find Kira's TiddlyWiki. And you could build on that, or you could start your own. It's kind of it's just an interesting topic, and it gives you a lot of content, and it's a nice size. It's very handleable. I think Steve's building an adventure game. Would you call yours an adventure game? Sort of. And maybe somebody else was talking about an adventure game. So I built some links to them. And I think they're pretty straightforward how it would work. You can take an existing text, a text-based adventure game. You could take a card-based adventure game and Wikify it, or you could take an existing computer-based and extract it and Wikify it. So that would work. People who are doing research, a lot of the graduate students have to do final thesis projects, research projects. Undergraduate students have semester papers sometimes in their classes. You could write a bibliography that was similar to one of the exercises that we've done. I've started a demo. This explains how to use a format called BibTeX for managing bibliographic entries. This one has 85 bibliographic references in it. Here's a list of the reference list. So you could begin to annotate them and tag them. And again, that's really going to be of interest to somebody who has a project to do. It may not be very interesting if you're not interested in the content. You could make a video player, an audio player out of TiddlyWiki if you had, 100 songs, genre, artist, music, mood, play the song, navigate to the next song, make a playlist. You could do the same thing with video. So you can, there's a built-in video player and an audio player, or at least an audio player in TiddlyWiki. There's not a video player, but there's built-in audio player. It does audio very nicely. So you could basically make it a player, and that would be interesting. Somebody's doing D&D. Somebody's doing a campaign. Maybe that was not, I don't remember. If you're into Dungeons and Dragons, if you click this Google link, I think it searches for TiddlyWiki Dungeons and Dragons. And there's other people in the world who have done this. So if that's something that you play with, yeah.
There's a rather popular website called Roll20.
Yep.
That's literally is formatted in TiddlyWiki.
So is that written in TiddlyWiki?
Yep.
Yeah. Is that Dungeons and Dragons?
Yes.
Yeah.
An entire website for Dungeons and Dragons.
Yep. So
might be worth looking at.
Yeah. So if you're interested in that, follow that up. It's an idea, a discography. Tristan isn't here. He's talking about doing that. I built one for a jazz musician who happened to live in my hometown. So I think this doesn't play the songs, but it could. So I can surf this guy, Paul Bley, who's a reasonably famous jazz musician. These are the albums that he has. These are all the songs that he's released. These are the different years that he's released music. So I can sort by year. I can find his album. I can still click on it all the times that this is released. So now you begin to see how this becomes a discography. You could do the same thing for an artist who's a visual artist with all of their content. So it's a collection, and TiddlyWiki is a collection manager where each of the tiddlers, if you will, or each of the objects, the song, the album, the painting, the sculpture, becomes a tiddler, and it has metadata that you can then navigate it on. Some of the IDT students are beginning to think about gathering data for their project. So this is a demo I built for one of them. And she's going to, she's a high school teacher. She was here a couple classes ago, actually. She's a high school teacher, teaches technology. She has a bunch of students who she teaches how to do 3D printing. And so she has a variety of data collection objects. So she might like have an observation of student D who's working on the water bottle holder. So we can create a Tiddler student D observation water bottle holder. So we build a shell for her to put in her data. And it gets, and then out of that becomes an ethnographic data collector. If you're interested in doing research along those lines, then we set up TiddlyWiki as a collector of your data. Obviously, it's going to do your references, and you write it in there, so it becomes a container for a whole thesis. We talked about green eggs and ham. We talked about that briefly, yeah. So again, you can Google it. Think about, here's someone who was in the class a couple years ago, and his green eggs and ham is somewhere in here. And so he does this whole analysis of that project, and you know, you can see what they're rhyming, and it's just a whole I like that because there's a lot. I mean, it sounds really silly to do it, but there's literally 50 words, 75 lines. And then, so how could you create something that would be maybe fun for kids to play instead of just to analyze, that they could somehow engage in the story in a totally different way? It doesn't have to be green eggs and ham. It can be any, to me, it's a kid's book, but it doesn't have to be a kid's book. It could be any text that you're going to interact with. So as opposed to an adventure game, which has choices, these are just ways of interacting with a fixed text. It's a little different. I just call it the Green Eggs and Ham Project, but it could be any text. Similar to an adventure game, any kind of interactive fiction. This game is made in Twine. Anybody use Twine? Anybody ever play in Twine? So Twine is it's actually based in TiddlyWiki, and it's an interactive fiction creator. It's different than an adventure game because there's not choices in the same way, but it allows you to move through the game. I think it would be kind of cool to do that in poetry. You could take a bunch of poems and build links between them somehow. If any of you write poetry, you might take a collection of poetry if there's connections. I don't know. So I'm not a poet, and I don't write literature, and I don't really read it very much. So I'm speaking way out of tune. But my guess is that if any of you are interested, that we could figure out stuff that you could do. We talked about Mad Libs. I just think it would be pretty cool. I don't know exactly how it would work. We played in Wikipedia, so now I'm calling it Tiddly Wikipedia. I have this concept that pretty much you could take any Wikipedia article and change the way that you consume it by wikifying it. So any Wikipedia article. So then we'll call that Tiddly Wikipedia. You might write it so that any Wikipedia article could be handled. That's a lot of work. You probably do it custom for a specific article and just live with that. And if you do that, I'd especially be interested in seeing you work with the raw media wiki code instead of copying and pasted the HTML code. And so those are the ones that I built so far. And there's lots of other ways that we can, lots of other kinds of projects that we can imagine. So those are the sets of project ideas. And I think that is pretty much all I wanted to walk through. Yeah, so those are the ideas. And that's it.